Hi, this is Tommy's Piano Corner and I'm Tommy. The place for returning pianists or indeed anybody who loves the piano to share tips and ideas about how we can get the best from this great hobby. Have you ever thought about learning Chopin's C# minor waltz? This is a piece I've been learning for quite some time now, and I have to admit it has given me quite a lot of trouble. In the process, I've found a few little tips that have helped me get it more under control, and I'll share those with you today. Are you sitting comfortably? Then let's begin. This beautiful little waltz, at its simplest, is basically 3 sections. You have a first section in C# minor, a second section in D flat major, and then it returns to the first section in C# minor again. However, what's even cleverer is that each of these sections is then further split down in this very clever, wonderful little symmetry where the section itself has 2 main parts. Each of these parts is basically split into 2 and repeated, but with a slightly different ending. Let me try to show you what I mean. If we look at the first part, it basically starts with this motif. And then continues. Until the motif comes back again. But this time, the ending is slightly different. So that's the first part of this first section, but then in the second part it moves into a 8th note or quaver section. And it does exactly the same here. The section starts like this, and then before the repeat we have this, then it comes back to what we had before, and finishes like this. The second section in D flat major follows the same kind of principle. You start off with this part, which before it repeats finishes up like this. Then we repeat. But move into a slightly different ending. The second half to this second section is then in fact the same 8th note section we had as the second half of the first section. After that, we go back to the first section again. And again, almost note for note, this plays out to the end, both in terms of the repeats of the first motif and then the repeats of the 8th note section. For me, the principal difficulty with this piece was the eighth note section, so the quaver section. I found that simply practicing it over and over and over again didn't really seem to make that much difference and didn't really help me improve it very much. I also found that that main little run-up towards the end of the eighth note section was always very prone to errors. Three other small problem areas were the crushed or grace notes at the beginning of the first section, and that little bit where you step down chromatically as part of the first section always seemed to have problems. And the last part, of course, was the little fioritura in the second section itself. Otherwise, I found the rest of it reasonably easy to manage. Not very easy, but reasonably easy to manage. Although admittedly still very prone to random errors and a problem with ghost notes in my left hand on the third beat of each bar. One of the first things that I did was to use my 4/4 waltz technique. I've already created a video on this, which I've linked here for you. Interestingly, what I discovered when playing the second variant, which is the crotchet, minim crotchet, or quarter, half, quarter note part, on the second set of quavers, so these notes that I've included in the score just here, it was very rarely smooth, and in fact, to be honest, it was actually quite jerky whenever I played it. To start to tackle this then, what I did was I created myself a set of exercises really focusing on just the fingers 3, 4 and 5 on these note patterns. Sticking with the 4/4 waltz idea, I would then practice all three variants of these exercises in terms of the rhythm, but I would spend a little more time practicing the second of them because that was the one that always seemed to show the most unevenness when I played it. Over time, I found that this definitely started to improve things, and in actual fact, when I've not played this waltz for a while, I have a tendency to go back to these exercises and do them for a few days when I'm bringing the piece back. Another thing I noticed was that this particular section was also quite prone to tension. And I found that after I'd filmed myself playing and watched it back, this was probably due to the fact that I was keeping my hands in a sort of locked, outstretched position so that I could play each of the notes without having to move so much. This is, of course, one of the things that's definitely called out by a lot of respectable piano teachers as being something that causes tension in your playing. To help myself get round this problem, what I started doing was using a more circular motion whilst playing this particular set of patterns. This idea again came from a Graham Fitch video where he describes using, I think he calls it an elliptical kind of motion when playing an arpeggio. And this is very, very similar, of course, to an arpeggio. I initially practiced this way using a very exaggerated motion when I was practicing slowly, and of course then letting the range of motion come ever so much smaller as I started to speed it up. Again, over time, this definitely seemed to improve things. The main run-up has probably always been the biggest challenge, I think. And if I'm honest, even to this day, if it's going to fall apart anywhere, this is probably the place where it will happen. To practice this, I focused mainly on my right hand, more drilling, I guess, than anything else, using the 4/4 waltz technique and all three variants that gives. Though With hindsight, I think one of the mistakes that I made whilst practicing this was never actually practicing it as written that often. I think I was sort of using the patterns as some kind of mental crutch because it was always easier to get it right in those patterns than it was to get it right just in the straight 3/4 time that it's written. I've now come to the conclusion that regardless of what practice technique you're using, you still need to keep going back and putting it back into its original context as it was originally written. Even if this means going back and playing it in that context extremely slowly so that you're able to play it correctly. I also found to help with the security of this particular passage, it was necessary to start practicing it much faster than I would ever likely want to play it in performance. And this is some advice that I actually got from Chang's book on the fundamentals of piano practice. Again, link below for you. For those little crushed or grace notes, when I first started practicing these, I started using a very flat rhythm, focusing predominantly on getting the first of the notes directly aligned with my thumb. I gradually then increased the speed and also moved more towards the as written rhythm when playing this. However, what I noticed for some reason when I started to record myself with this piece, that quite frequently the melody notes in the right hand, I simply just wouldn't sound them. So it was only the top notes that were playing. This was something I'd never actually noticed when I was practicing. I didn't hear it when I was practicing it myself. So it just goes to show there's a great value in recording your practice sessions. Once I had noticed this, I then went back to drilling each day just those few bars with great attention to the harmony notes. As for that little fioritura, really the only way I found to do this was to simply keep drilling it until it became fluent and smooth in my hand. Is this a piece that you've either worked on or you're thinking of working on in the future? I recorded this as part of the intro video to my channel, and if you'd like to listen to the recording, I've linked it here for you. Like most of my pieces, I'd still say that this is a work in progress. It needs improving in sections. I need to get better and more reliable at playing it. Although I now am fairly relaxed about playing it at home when people visit. A microphone, of course, picks up every last little blemish, whereas when people are listening in the lounge, any of these small imperfections pass almost unnoticed, I guess. If you're not already, then remember, of course, to subscribe to Tommy's Piano Corner and to click the little bell icon so that you're notified of new videos as and when these are released. I thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next week.